New Testament reading today comes from Matthew, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, which is located in your Pew Bible in the New Testament on page 5. Concerning almsgiving, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Concerning prayer, and whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Amen.
Among the Jews of Jesus' day, there were three pillars of religious devotion. There was alms giving, or we would say helping those in need, prayer, and there was fasting. And in our passage this morning, we encountered Jesus' teaching on the first two of these pillars. And it's clear that Jesus expected that his disciples would continue these practices. When you give alms, when you are praying, he said, when, not if. Unlike many in the Greco-Roman world of Jesus' day, the Jews regarded giving to the poor as a religious obligation, not merely a humanitarian one. And in a section on economic justice in Deuteronomy chapter 15, God's people are instructed to give liberally and to be ungrudging. And Deuteronomy 15 verse 11 sums up the instruction there on giving to those in need in this way. It says, "Since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land." The practices of giving to neighbors in need and of prayer are still important to God's people today. The Chronicle of Philanthropy reported in the fall of 2017 that fewer Americans were making room in their household budgets for charitable giving, and that nonprofits were increasingly relying on the affluent to support their budgets and their efforts. And an economist at Texas A&M suggested that the Great Recession may have broken the habit of giving for some Americans. And then each year in May, as a nation, we observe the National Day of Prayer. That annual observance was enacted in 1952 by Congress and by President Truman, in part to distinguish our American society from that of the atheistic Soviet Union. And Pew Research has reported that for many Americans, every day is a day of prayer. 55% of us in one survey said that we pray every day. And the same survey found that 63% of Christians in the U.S. said that praying regularly is an essential part of their Christian identity. But we realize that there is more to the practice of prayer than national observances and public prayer breakfasts. And we know that giving help to those in need is not always channeled through official agencies. Sometimes it's a much more direct neighbor-to-neighbor encounter. Today's text comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he was encouraging his followers to practice personal prayer and charitable giving in a private manner. Our society seems to be somewhat ambivalent regarding the need for privacy these days. Maybe you remember the story from just a few years ago about the Amazon Echo device, some of us think of as Alexa, that recorded a conversation between a husband and wife and then sent it to an employee of the husband's company. And Amazon offered a possible explanation for what they called a very rare event. But no matter, feeling that their privacy had been violated, that couple immediately disconnected all their Alexa devices. Privacy is a requirement, in fact, for healthy relationships. It shows respect for boundaries, and it's a necessary condition to preserve the dignity of those who are being helped. In today's text, Jesus' scenario of helping a neighbor in need is actually a triangle of relationship. There is first the person who is giving the aid, and then, of course, there's the one who's being helped. But God is also involved in that relationship. I imagine that we most often read Jesus' words here solely from the perspective of the one who's giving the help. Maybe it's easier for me to picture myself as the one doing the helping. But when I am the one in need of someone else's generosity of time or money or care, how do I want to be treated? This is why as a church we try to be very careful in how we administer the fellowship fund and careful with how much information is shared about the situation involved, because it's all too easy to become judgmental towards those receiving help. That judgment prevents the growth of brotherly and sisterly relationships between the giver and the receiver. The person in need of assistance may well have contributed in a major way to his or her present predicament, but none of us skates through life without making some poor choices along the way. When you give help to another, can you see yourself on the other side of the exchange? In verse 2 of this morning's text, we read, "So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you." Now, trumpets were not literally used, but Jesus is using humorous exaggeration to make a point, like when he talked about the difficulty of squeezing a camel through the eye of a needle. In terms that we would understand, Jesus might say, when you go to help somebody, don't throw it up on the Jumbotron for all the world to see how great you are. We do not need naming rights over the people we help. And the reward of love acting in private between my neighbor and me and God is that intimacy with God is deepened and my solidarity with the neighbors is strengthened. Jesus taught, but when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Most of us, I expect, can remember a time in our lives when things spiraled out of control for us and we needed help from someone. Many years ago, while our family was living in western Colorado, some new acquaintances from Denver invited us to meet them in Vail and spend a few nights together. And it was a trip where things seemed to go wrong from the very beginning. Before the day of the trip even arrived, our car broke down. So we borrowed a van from another friend, and we headed east on Interstate 70 towards Vail, and it was snowing heavily in Glenwood Canyon, and the ice was all rutted on the highway, and suddenly I lost control of the vehicle as the wheels were captured by those ruts. To our right was the cliff and the river below. To our left was the mountainside padded with the snowdrifts. And hoping that no 18-wheelers were heading in our direction just around the curve ahead, I somehow managed to spin the van away from the river on the right, and we slammed into the mountainside on the westbound side of the highway, and then we exhaled. And after we checked to see that we were all unhurt, I got out to check the van, and I found that one headlight had been knocked out, but there was no other visible damage. But then I suddenly realized that we were stuck on the front axle of the van. We were not going anywhere without some serious help. We flagged a ride back to Glenwood Springs from a Good Samaritan who was passing, and the gas station attendant in Glenwood Springs informed us that towing was not an immediate possibility. And because we had exchanged minimal contact with our friends whom we were to meet in Vail, we were unable to let them know of our predicament. But we suddenly remembered an American Baptist pastoral colleague who lived close by. So we called him, and he agreed to come help us immediately. He hooked his Jeep to the stuck van, and he pulled and tried to dislodge it, but it just was not moving. But he didn't give up. He flagged down another motorist, and connecting the other vehicle to his Jeep and to our van, the two vehicles together were able to pull us off the axle and back onto the road. And from there, we drove back with our colleague to collect our thoughts. We were so grateful for his help, and we thanked him, and he smiled understandingly and assured us, "Hey, I've been there." To reach the point in our Christian discipleship where we can honestly say, "Hey, I've been there," makes it possible for us to build community rather than to sow divisions among people. Because God in Christ can say, "Hey, I've been there." We can bring everything to God in prayer. In Hebrews chapter 4, we read of Christ, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." Jesus warned, "And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward." The original meaning of hypocrite came from show business of the day. It referred to an actor on stage who wore a mask while playing the role of a character in a play. But Jesus said, this is not what you are doing in prayer, playing a role before God or the world around. Come to God in radical honesty. God can handle it. Most of us, I expect, have been in gatherings of Christians where somebody began to pray a sermon directed at other people in the group. "Oh God, help people to realize that," whatever. But Jesus' teaching steers us away from that kind of praying. Whenever you pray, he said, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Now, what that room of privacy is may vary for each one of us. Susanna Wesley, mother of John and Charles Wesley, who founded the Methodist movement, was herself called the Mother of Methodism. And over the course of her married life, Susanna Wesley gave birth to 19 children. And her husband was often absent from the home for extended periods of time. But in those conditions, Susanna Wesley could only throw her apron over her head to get some privacy for her prayer time. For us, our private room will be some other arrangement. I remember for a period of years when we lived in Rhode Island, I would pray while out on my long-distance runs. However we manage it, we all need to carve out that privacy with God, that time and that place in which to become radically honest with our Creator. And we need that kind of prayer in which we can pour our hearts out to God about that difficult relationship or that hurt from many years ago that just won't go away by itself, or that secret struggle in my life, or my need, like the Old Testament Job, to just let God know that I don't really like the way that things have been going in my life lately. Only when we do that are we in a position to hear God say, hey, I've been there. And without that honesty before God, we are not really inviting God to come into the situation and go to work in our lives. Whatever you may be facing this morning, can you hear God's word to you? Hey, I've been there. Come and tell me about it. Hear Jesus' promise to you once again. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Amen.